Upon first hearing a statement along the lines of men and women don't really like each other, you're probably going to first think, is this guy on crack? Is he crazy? No, I don't mean that men and women aren't attracted to each other. Of course they are. In fact, the majority of the source of the conflict between men and women boils down to the fact that men and women are attracted to each other. Of course they, in air quotes, like each other. They desire each other. But what I'm talking about is all the stuff that goes on beyond the raw physical mating and dating attraction level. And at the individual level, I would argue men and women don't really like each other terribly much. And more importantly, at the macroscopic level, I think this has become manifestly true in recent decades. So usually when people think about men and women not getting along, they think about it at the local level, the microscopic level, the individual level. And it's absolutely true that men and women at the local individual level have not been getting along particularly well. And I would make the argument this was kind of always the case, but environmental constraints of the past prevented A, the wide-scale acknowledgement of this, and B, the situation from spiraling out of control as it has now in the current year. And so everyone is keyed into the fact that the reality on the ground is that mating and dating has probably never been as difficult as it has been, at least for the last couple of decades or centuries, as it is now, just in terms of trying to find the quote-unquote right partner, for both men and women, albeit for different reasons. Most men can't find any woman, and most women are not willing, due to their biology, to quote-unquote settle down or find somebody that they think is quote-unquote below their level. They're just hardwired to think that way. It is what it is. That's just how they are. To a woman, having lots of choice when you're not interested in the choices is pretty much the same as having no choice. So effectively, more or less the same thing. And you have this massive social media apparatus that is amplifying the individual issues, because so much of the interpersonal relationships between men and women occur online, and it has become essentially the place where you meet people. In fact, these days, if you meet a woman outside of the online context, say in a club or playing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever it might be, you're probably more an exception than you are the rule. So you have that element. They can't even find people to get together with, both men and women, albeit for different reasons. And then you have all the messy interpersonal stuff. And why is this the case? Well, men and women are fundamentally different. It's no surprise if you've been on this channel for a while. They're very, very different in terms of the psychology, in terms of what they want. And this has always been a problem. But again, the ancestral environment and even earlier environments like a century ago provided a setting that prevented the worst of these things from getting out of hand. But now in a world where women are out earning men to various degrees, and they are certainly attending more university than men are and getting more educated, whatever that means, because they don't talk about the types of degrees they do, but let's just set that aside for now. Well, the macroscopic world is having an effect on the microscopic. It's no surprise. There's always an interplay between this. So let's look in the statement, men and women don't really like each other. Desiring somebody, wanting to have sex with them, wanting to have children, potentially, is in some sense liking someone, but does that mean you want to spend a lot of time with them, hang out with them, talk to them? Not really. If you look at a lot of older marriages, and I have, you can see that, yeah, they were arrangements that kind of worked, but the men and women didn't really do a lot together. They didn't have a whole lot in common. They did things because it was necessary for the sake of raising the kids, whatever. It was all about obligation. But we don't live in that world of obligation anymore, at least ostensibly not. So people, both men and women, will reject that kind of arrangement and relationship because they want to actually, quote unquote, like the person. The problem is men and women being so different, they just don't. Different interests, different trajectories, different drives. Libido gap is one of them, but it's not just that. The type of things that men like to talk about and the topics that animate them are, on average, not the same ones as the ones that do so with women. And on top of that, even when you do get quote-unquote converging interests, the women's take on these things is totally different. So you look at, for example, women's interest in RPG games, and it's a totally different take from what men are interested in when it comes to RPG games, which are largely mechanics, overall story, builds, beating enemies, and doing the best they can, getting the most powerful weapons. And women are all about relationships and writing fan fiction and dressing up the characters and things that are typically very girly. So even when you do have this converging interest, it isn't really the same expression of that interest because the object of interest is very different, even though superficially it seems to be the same thing. So wow, big deal. Men and women struggle in their interpersonal relationships because they're so different. That's nothing new under the sun, although something that's relatively new is just how difficult that's become. When we talk about the macroscopic stuff, all these forces are converging, again, to make it much more difficult at that interpersonal level. And although frequently people will talk about intrasexual competition, right? Competition between men and competition between women and women, and this is definitely a thing, and we evolved to do that. Even though men and women don't technically compete with each other in an ancestral environment, these days there is a kind of artificially created intersexual competition. Now, a lot of people say, oh, it's down to feminism. Some of it, maybe. But the harsh reality is, in a gynocentric world, where women are going to be given a leg up over men because sperm is cheap and eggs are expensive, at the end of the day, you're going to see a situation where, whether it comes to research done for illnesses and healthcare and money spent in general, women are going to get the lion's share of that. They actively campaign for that. Think about breast cancer awareness, things like that. Is there a prostate awareness alliance? Not really. But we mentioned education, obviously. And the fact that more and more women are getting educated going to university is making it more difficult for them to, quote unquote, date. And as the evolutionary psychologist, Lord William Costello, has pointed out, there's some minor evidence to suggest that women are dating down now, but the results of that seem to be, on average, according to the data he gathered, more domestic abuse, more conflict, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not really looking good. So intersexual competition is actually a thing. It's a culturally generated thing, but it is a thing. Because in any world or civilization or society where there are a limited number of resources, those resources need to be allocated somewhere, right? And if it's choice between allocating the majority of the resources to men or women, on average, given our inclinations to favor women in such situations, we are going to allocate those resources to women and not men. If that doesn't flat out create resentment, of course, it will create some level of conflict, or at the very least indifference. And this intersexual competition, which again is socially and culturally generated, is making it a lot more difficult for men and women to get along at the individual level. We don't have a map in our head saying, eggs are very, very costly to produce. Therefore, we need to favor women because if the tribe gets reduced down to a few individuals, they would be more valuable. And sperm is cheap, so it doesn't matter as much. But this is how we act nonetheless. To invoke the wise words of the great Lord of Gingers, it is the ooga booga writ large. So radical differences at the level of psychology, at the level of hormones, radical differences at the level of interests, and macroscopically speaking, in terms of the socio-cultural effects, radical differences there too. There is a real thing that has emerged called intersexual competition. I'm not cheering it on, I'm just calling it like it is. And this is all converging to make it very, very difficult for men and women to get along. But does this really surprise anybody? As I've argued many times, simply wanting to have sex with somebody, simply wanting to reproduce with somebody, find them attractive, does not mean you actually like them or even want to get along with them. It's a lot more complicated than that. And men and women being as vastly different as they are, it would require a Herculean effort on the part of both parties to get to a stage where they actually could get along, let alone like each other. When people are vastly different from each other in whatever way, they typically don't like each other. And men and women are vastly different from each other. Hence, they typically don't like each other. And in a sense, it's a kind of prisoner's dilemma. Because when you're playing the prisoner's dilemma game, somebody needs to make that first move and take the risk, and nobody really is. First off, men are invisible, nobody gives a damn about men, and everyone cares about what's happening to women. So it probably would be on men to take that risk, and it's just not really worth it, is it? Because you're probably going to get shat on anyway, regardless of the outcome. So the best case scenario we could possibly get out of all of this would be something along the lines of men and women, quote unquote, cooperating to get things done, to have children, to reproduce, to produce the next generation, etc., etc. But we're so far away from that now, beyond the simple fact that men and women on some basic level don't really like each other very much, that it is pretty grim times indeed. I think young men in particular need to ask themselves, what is it they're actually going for in terms of women? What do they want? Because at the end of the day, okay, if you don't want to reproduce and have children, do you just want to get your rocks off? What's the deal? Because that's the real reason men get together with women, so they can have kids. I have a friend who wants to have kids, and his wife annoys him. And why does he deal with it? So he can get kids out of the deal. And so if that's not what you want, then think about why it is, other than the magical fuzzy-wuzzy feelings you get when you get your rocks off in the presence of a woman, why it is that you want to spend time with her. And I'm not saying you should do one thing or the other, but it's something to consider. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, all that YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. Everyone take care. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.